Depression is something that can totally take over your body. It can shut your body down. It can cause it to go into a state of imbalance. Depression also, as you know, affects the mind. The mind doesn't generate its creative energies like it used to. It doesn't have the passion and the drive like it used to. It goes flat, and that's why it is called depression. Depression also affects what you would call the spirit. The spirit, as you know it, has been a part of the whole body, mind, and soul equation. And now it seems that the spirit has left, that the spirit has gone. Perhaps you feel abandoned in some way, that God isn't there, that you don't have a spirit, that there's nothing more to life than the nothingness that is in front of you right now. A depressed human will hide in their dark little room, as miserable as it seems, because in many cases it is more comfortable than facing the outside world, facing all of the implications of everything that they have been and done. And so often they'll blame it on other factors, and you could spend lifetimes trying to analyze and psychoanalyze how they got there. But the reality is, the basic is that they got there because it is a natural part of the ascension process. It doesn't matter if the ascension process caused them to have difficult lifetimes or problems adjusting in this lifetime. Those are relatively superficial to the underlying, the root energy. They are going through a transformation, a very difficult one, one that is made even more confusing by the very hectic pace of today's life, one that is made confusing by issues such as incest and brutality when they were younger. But again, we're talking about depression that is spiritually based, that is the nature, the type and nature that our listeners and readers and shaumbra are going through. This does not apply to many of the non-ascension related types of depression. They are similar, but there are significant differences between the two. There are some humans who are not going through an awakening process who will never get this material. They're going through depression simply caused by life situations, the loss of a mate, the loss of a job, by overindulging in some of the more human things on earth, where they get into a very low energy. But actually, that type of depression is not nearly as catastrophic and difficult to deal with as a spiritual awakening or an ascension depression. You're going to be able to recognize those who are, more surface. They more absorbed with their superficial self. Whereas somebody going through spiritual depression there's going to be so much more depth, but it will be almost a denial or loathing of self. They will not want to even talk about themselves, where somebody going through a more typical human depression actually becomes energized by talking about themselves. You are simply going through a spiritual metamorphosis process. You are going from being a human to a divine human angel. And you are in an energy or a period of your life where you are in between everything, in between yourself. Everything that you thought you were and were going to be seems to be going out the door, leaving you. You're in between in this whole stage of going beyond the human self. And it seems like an empty hole, even worse than that, no hole at all. It is not the mind that is causing spiritual depression. You can delve into the mind, you can do analysis, you can do probing and everything else into the mind. And ultimately, it is not the mind causing that. Now, initially it may masquerade that way, and it may appear that way. Depression is a very insidious energy. It is a very tricky energy. It disguises itself in any different way to continue to keep you in that depressed state, for you to keep you in that depressed state. Do you want to get out? Do you want to live again? You have to ask yourself that question first. Well, you're existing right now. You say, but I am living. You're only existing. Do you want to live again, but differently? Do you want to break out of the cocoon? You want to spread your wings and show your colors in a way you could have never imagined before. The depression has a related waveform or energy cycle that is not evident by the conscious human mind. You could say that the antithesis of the depression is a waveform on the other side of the veil in the non-physical realms that is literally counterbalancing and moving along systematically with the depressed cycle of the human on Earth. So the depressed cycle is actually needed to create the energy wave on the other side of the veil to eventually propel the human being through the corridors of ascension. It is generating its own energy. And there are, how to say, when you take these psychotropic drugs, it cuts off or flatlines the energy of the human on Earth. It keeps this energy dip from occurring. You've got a big problem. You've got a human who's flatlined, who perhaps thinks they feel better, but that's all that's happening. They only think they feel better. You now have an imbalanced energy in the other dimension and realms that can't find its way, and now you can literally send the human into a tailspin when they come off of the psychotropic drugs, because they have an imbalanced spirit energy as well.
It's like putting a big, thick, heavy blanket on top of a burning fire, like a fire pit, a campfire. Oh, I put the fire out. You put the blanket on top of it. You walk away. There's no more flames. Everything is calmed down. You see, the fire must be out. What's underneath that blanket? Mm-hmm. What those burning embers, and it may take months or a year or two, but those burning embers are finally going to erupt that blanket and start a great big fire. These days, if you have a mass shooting somewhere, or you have somebody that kills a lot of people one way or the other, if they're not a terrorist, using your definition of a terrorist, they probably have been or are on the SSRI type of drugs, and they've been on them for a while. Not short term. Short term, it kind of does settle things. Long term, it's explosive. They don't know how to get help anymore, even within themselves. You're also going to see you already are seeing a dramatic increase in the use of antidepressants. It covers kind of a wide range of mood drugs and SSRIs and other things, but something to suppress the mind and the emotions. 13% of the adult population in the United States currently uses antidepressants. It only takes about 0.5% of humanity doing something to change the fabric of mass consciousness in kind of a permanent way. Less than 0.5%. Now we have 13% of American adults using some form of antidepressants. Worldwide, about 10%. That's going to increase to about 33% in the next 5 to 6 years. Because that's depressing. Yet it's very depressing, except for the people taking them. They're kind of happy for a little while. But there's very, very few things I talk about with shaumbra that I'm opposed to. Very, very few rules. You can do what you want. But I do set out a warning for the antidepressants because there's really not enough good research about how they work or why they work. All they know is then given to people, they become suppressed, quote unquote happier, but they're really just suppressed. And without really understanding what they do to the brain, what they do to your life, how they take sensuality and joy and ups and downs. Ups and downs are part of awakening, as you know. When I first came in to talk to Shaumbra, we had a lot of discussions about the awakening zone, the ups and downs, and why they're important. What happens on a consciousness and an energy level as you go through the hills and the valleys. It ultimately catapults you into coming to mastery and finally realization. It's an important element. When that's not there because of the suppression of medications, the tremendous amount of energy gets locked up within a person, within their brain, and finally, in one way or the other, it explodes. It blows up. It has to. You know, the emotions, the feelings, the traumas, the memories, they're still there. They're just covered up by these antidepressants or anti-anxiety medications. They're still there. And sooner or later, they'll come out. That's why you're going to see the suicide rate going up.
When you're in this darkest hole, you want to die, you want to let go, and we're going to cross some boundaries here. If you die a physical death, that is all right. You will then be able to come back into a new body if you choose and continue with the process, you see. Now, we're going to warn you though, when you die the physical death, you take too many pills or you slash your wrists, this darkness stays with you, you see. You're simply trading in for a new physical body. The depression will limit your ability to fully return into the celestial realms. You will basically not even pass go, so to speak. You will stay very earthbound. You will stay very confused. You will simply come back now as a very sad and confused young baby.
We know there are situations where sometimes you are so out of balance that you need just a short infusion of stabilization. And sometimes, not usually, but sometimes these drugs, the depression drugs, can return you back to a short sense of remembrance of what it was like to be balanced. But we say short time, we mean very short, because if you go more than 28 days on these depression drugs, instead of giving yourself a reminder of what it was like to be balanced, now you become reliant. We have known those who have wondered about the wisdom of our words, saying it is time to get off those medications or not get on them at all. And now we are explaining that only for a very short time to remind your total self what it is like to be rebalanced, but then take that energy, the remembrance and the resonance of rebalance, keep that moving within you, and then get off of the physical pills.
Spiritual depression is an unfortunate condition. You go through it in order to have that final surrender and final release. And there may come a day here on earth where this dark night of the soul is not necessary, when this depression is not part of the process. But right now, it appears that it is. Right now, we're going to ask you, as difficult as it is, to accept it. We've been asked time and time again, how can we get through the depression? Give us some hope. Give us some pills, perhaps. Give us a way out. And we come here on this day to give a message that perhaps is not going to satisfy so many of you, but it is about accepting it. It is about embodying it. It is about, as odd as this seems, it is about understanding the joy of depression. It seems to be a contradiction in terms, for how can you find joy in this darkest of all times? But we're here to share with you that there is tremendous energy and there is tremendous love from Spirit and from your divine self contained in this time of depression. We know you want to fight it. We know you want to deny it. We know you want to get rid of it. We're going to ask you instead to breathe it, to be it, to discover what is in it. For everything that comes along to you, there is something to discover. There is a gift. And in this depression, there is joy. You'd be amazed at what a few deep breaths of compassion will do for the individual. Now, it seems also to some like a very basic answer. It seems like this needs to be treated with all sorts of psychoanalysis and perhaps drugs and all of these other things. But let us get back to some of the root energy. Get back to the basics. As you said, the breath. If you can get a depressed human breathing again, that simple act of breathing, and then through the breath, you bring in the compassion. And then with the compassion, you bring in the embodiment of the depression. It starts moving energy again. That is, it is so basic, but it works. And if you can get them breathing again, one breath at a time, it transcends anything that your medications can do. And we know that many are shaking their heads or perhaps don't agree or thinking that this is too simple of a solution. But it is the simple breath. It may take 100, 1,000, 1,000,000, or 10 million attempts at the conscious breath. But when they hit it, when the client gets it, it all comes together. Take a deep breath, a conscious breath. When you do this simplest, most basic thing, it acknowledges that you choose life. You're bringing life energy into your being. Your spirit feels it. Your body brings energy in with it. Your mind shuts down for a moment while you're taking the conscious breath. A transformation cycle can now move again and expand again. It is so simple. Medical doctors may strongly disagree and may give us all the reasons in the world and may bring in the fear of things like suicide and death and throw that upon us and tell us how our perception of this process is amateur, if not immature. But we're telling you, dear doctors, get them breathing. It's the most important thing you can do, and the most difficult. It is easier to give them pills. It is easier and more financially rewarding to spend years in psychotherapy. Get them breathing. The breath can help anyone overcome depression because you cannot breathe deeply. You cannot breathe sincerely and stay depressed. The breath will bring up the issues that psychoanalysis will never be able to bring up. The breath brings up truth. Now, some don't want to do this because they're afraid of the deep breath. They're afraid of what might come up. Dealing with somebody in a high state of depression, someone who feels they may be violent or angry, requires guidance and counseling. You can't just tell them to start breathing and then leave them to their own. It takes compassion. It takes great patience, particularly one who has left the type of drugs, the psychotropic drugs, and what we call the mind drugs. They're having a very, very difficult time, but if you can get them back to the breath, get them back to breathing in life, that is what has died within them, life and the desire to live. For whatever reason, and it truly doesn't matter, they've gone into a state of depression, but they can reignite themselves through the breath. I know some of you will think this is too simple. They need a lot of techniques and they need a lot of other things. But the breath is the simplest way to get through the depression. Try it for yourself. If you're ever feeling depressed, just start breathing. You may feel some resistance to the breath. You may try it a few times and say, this is nonsense. Keep breathing and you'll find it is very difficult to stay in the state of depression.